Every night around 11 p.m., I heard the creak of the floorboards outside my room. My son's footsteps, slow, deliberate, too cautious for a boy his age, echoed through the hallway. At first I thought it was the wind or the old house settling into its bones. But when I caught a glimpse of his door closing softly, followed by the faint blue light of his phone as he slipped into the hall, something inside me went still. I asked him once where he went every night, and he just smiled a small, quiet smile that didn't belong to a 14-year-old. That smile haunted me more than any scream could. That's when I stopped sleeping through the night. Because when a child hides something, it's either a secret or a cry for help. And I was about to find out which one. My name is Raymond Walker. I'm 58 years old, a retired engineer, and a widower. My wife Helen passed away 5 years ago after a long battle with cancer. Since then, it's just been me and my boy Liam in this old 2-story house outside Salem, Oregon. It's quiet here, the kind of quiet people think they want until they actually have it. The wind moves through the pine trees at night like a voice whispering through time. Some nights, I can still hear Helen humming in the kitchen, even though I know she's long gone. Liam used to fill this house with laughter. He was a talker, always telling me stories about his day, his friends, his dreams of becoming a video game designer. He'd sit by the window, sketching heroes and monsters, and proudly show me each one. But lately that spark was gone. He kept to himself. He'd come home from school, mumble a hello, then disappear into his room until dinner. When I asked what he was working on, he'd shrug or say homework. When I asked if he wanted to go fishing like we used to, he'd just smile politely and say he was tired. At first I told myself it was normal. Teenagers change. They pull away. Maybe I was just being paranoid, an old man clinging to a son who was growing up too fast. But then I started noticing little things. One morning when I went to pick up his laundry, I saw faint scratches on his arm. Not deep, but enough to make me pause. He said they were from the neighbor's cat, though I hadn't seen that cat in months. Another day I found mud on his shoes, though it hadn't rained in over a week. And then there was the smell, damp and earthy, like he'd been somewhere underground. Our neighbor, Mrs. Dorsey, an elderly woman who'd known us for years, stopped me one afternoon while I was taking out the trash. "Ray," she said in that half-whispering tone people use when they're about to share something unsettling. "I saw Liam the other night. He was walking across my yard around midnight." "Are you sure?" I asked, half laughing, half nervous. She nodded. I was up with my insomnia again. He had a flashlight. Looked like he was heading toward the old church road. I thanked her, told her I'd talk to him, and went back inside. But I didn't talk to him. Not right away. Because I wasn't ready for what the answer might be. That evening, we sat at the dinner table in near silence. I tried to make conversation, but it felt like speaking across a canyon. "How's school?" I asked. "Fine. Friends." "You still talk to Nathan?" He shrugged. "Sometimes." He ate fast, barely looking up. His fork clinked against the plate in a rhythm that made my chest ache. Helen used to say, when a child stops talking, something bigger than words is happening. I remembered that now like a warning from the past. After dinner, I watched as he disappeared into his room again. The door closed with a soft click, and the sound felt final. I sat in my recliner, the TV playing some rerun I wasn't watching, and listened to the house breathe. The longer I listened, the more I noticed the subtle things, the creak near his window, the faint shuffle of feet, the sigh of the front door when the wind pushed against it. That night I woke around 11 to the same sound that had been bothering me for weeks, the floorboard groaning outside my door. I sat up in bed holding my breath. Through the crack under the door, I saw a sliver of moving light. My heart started pounding. I reached for my glasses and crept to the door, opening it just enough to see the hallway. There he was. Liam, wearing his jacket, shoes, backpack slung over one shoulder, moving slowly down the stairs with his phone light guiding the way. "Liam," I whispered, but too softly for him to hear. He paused at the bottom of the stairs, looked around as if making sure I wasn't awake, then quietly unlocked the back door and stepped outside. The cold night air rushed in before the door shut again. I stood frozen. Every instinct screamed to follow. But another part of me held back, afraid of what I might find. I waited by the window, peering through the blinds. The moonlight fell across the backyard, and in the distance, just beyond the fence, I caught sight of him. My boy, walking alone down the dirt road that led toward the old Salem church. The church had been closed for years, ever since the roof collapsed during a storm, but people said there were still gatherings there run by the new pastor, Glenn Morton. I'd met him once at the market, smiling, soft-spoken eyes too cold for his words. I watched Liam disappear into the dark, a small figure swallowed by the night. My mind raced through every possibility: drugs, gangs, peer pressure. None of it fit the boy I knew. But then again, I realized I didn't really know him anymore. I stayed awake until dawn, waiting for the sound of the door opening again. When it finally came just before sunrise, I walked to the stairs and saw him tiptoeing in, pale and trembling. His shoes were wet, his knuckles scraped raw. He froze when he saw me standing there. "Where were you?" I asked quietly. He blinked, startled, then forced a tired smile. "Just went out to clear my head." At 3 a.m, he shrugged. Couldn't sleep. I wanted to press him harder, but something in his eyes stopped me. Fear, confusion, maybe shame. I let him go, watched him climb the stairs and vanish behind his door. That day I sat in the kitchen long after he left for school, staring at my cold coffee, wondering what I was missing. A father should know his child. I thought I did. But when your only son begins to live a second life under your own roof, the silence becomes its own kind of storm. And that night when the wind picked up again, and I heard that same faint creak outside my door, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. The next time Liam walked out into the dark, I was going to follow him. The night air was sharp enough to bite. I stepped outside quietly, keeping the door from creaking as it shut behind me. The moon hung low over the trees, silver light spilling across the damp grass. Down the road, I saw a shadow moving slow, steady, almost deliberate. My son. He didn't look around once as he made his way toward the narrow path that led to the old Salem church. My hands were shaking as I followed, keeping far enough behind that my footsteps blended with the wind. I'd walked that road 1,000 times, but never in such silence. Every crunch of gravel sounded like thunder to me. Liam's hood was pulled up his shoulders, hunched against the cold. Once or twice, he looked over his shoulder, and I froze each time, barely breathing. When he turned back, I exhaled and kept going. The church came into view sooner than I expected, a tall silhouette of rotting wood and faded stone. The storm years ago had torn off half its roof, but someone had started repairs. I could see a dim orange glow from a side window, and the faint hum of voices carried on the breeze. Liam paused at a basement door on the side of the building, glanced around, then disappeared inside. I crept closer, crouching behind the row of pine trees that bordered the property. Through a crack in the basement door, I saw movement candlelight flickering against the walls. I strained to hear, but all I could make out was a low, rhythmic murmur. It wasn't quite singing, not exactly chanting either, something in between. Then a phrase broke through the muffled sound. "Cleanse the weakness, strengthen the spirit." My breath caught in my throat. I waited frozen until the murmuring faded into silence. The cold seeped into my bones as I crouched there watching the door. After what felt like an eternity, the light inside dimmed. I didn't see Liam come out, but I knew he was still in there. I wanted to storm inside, but fear held me still. What if I was wrong? What if this was just some harmless youth group? When I finally turned back toward home, the night felt heavier than before. My son was down there somewhere beneath that crumbling church, surrounded by strangers in the dark. The next morning, sunlight made everything look ordinary again, almost peaceful. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it all. But then I saw Liam at breakfast, his face, pale eyes fixed on his cereal bowl, as if he were trying not to exist. "Sleep all right?" I asked, pretending to read the paper. "Yeah," he said, voice flat. "Were you out last night?" He froze for half a second. "No, I was in bed." It wasn't just the lie, it was how easily it came out. Later that day, I drove into town under the pretense of running errands. Instead, I parked outside the church in daylight. The building looked old, but newly cleaned, as if someone had been restoring it piece by piece. I walked to the front entrance, where a simple sign read, "Salem Fellowship of Renewal Pastor Glenn Morton." Inside, the scent of old wood and wax lingered. A tall man in a pressed black shirt appeared from the side hallway. He had thinning gray hair, kind eyes, and a practiced smile. "Good morning, sir." "I'm Pastor Glenn," he said, extending a hand. "We're always glad to welcome new faces." I forced a polite smile. "I was just passing by. My son mentioned this place. Thought I'd take a look." "Ah, you must be Mr. Walker," he said immediately, as if he already knew me. "Your boy's a bright young man, very eager to learn." Something about his tone made me uneasy. "Learn what exactly?" He chuckled softly. "Discipline, understanding, connection. We guide our youth to find strength through spiritual focus. It keeps them grounded in a world that's lost its compass." "Sounds noble," I said, though my stomach twisted. He nodded, eyes locking on mine with unnerving calm. "Faith is structure, Mr. Walker, and discipline is love. We take those words seriously here." I excused myself a few minutes later, mumbling something about work. As I walked out, I glanced toward the side door leading to the basement. Deep scratches marked the wood near the handle, as though someone had clawed at it. That evening, I tried again to talk to Liam. He sat across the dinner table, shoulders stiff, eyes distant. "I met Pastor Glenn today," I said carefully. He looked up sharply, the first real expression I'd seen in days. "You went there?" "Yeah, he seems dedicated." Liam nodded once, eyes lowering again. "He helps people. He makes them better. How does he do that?" He hesitated, then whispered, "By showing us what's wrong inside." I felt my stomach sink. "And what's wrong inside you, son?" He didn't answer. He just stared at his plate and mumbled, "You wouldn't understand." After dinner, he went straight to his room and locked the door. Hours later, when the house had gone quiet, I stood in the hallway outside his room listening. The soft scrape of his pencil against paper came and went, then stopped. A chair creaked. Footsteps. I leaned closer. "Forgive me, Brother Glenn," I heard him whisper. The words hit me like ice water. The next afternoon, Mrs. Dorsey knocked on my door. She looked pale and nervous, clutching a shawl around her shoulders. "Ray," she said, glancing over her shoulder, "I hate to bother you, but I saw something again last night. Lights at the church, people moving in and out. Looked like children." My chest tightened. "Did you call the police?" She shook her head. "It's a small town. You know how it goes. People here, they don't want to stir trouble with the church. But something's wrong there. I can feel it." I thanked her, though my voice came out hollow. That night, I waited again. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock in the hall. Around midnight, I saw the sliver of light under Liam's door vanish. Then the quiet creak of floorboards. The door eased open. He moved like a ghost down the stairs. This time I followed. The moonlight followed us both, cutting through the fog. I stayed far enough behind that he wouldn't hear me. He walked faster tonight, almost like he was late for something. When he reached the church, the basement door was already ajar. He stepped inside without hesitation. I crept closer, my heart pounding so loud I thought it would give me away. I knelt beside the cracked foundation and peered through the narrow basement window. Candles. A circle of them, and faint shadows moving around them, small shapes kneeling. I saw Pastor Glenn's silhouette tall and commanding in the center. His voice calm and low carried through the thin glass. Discipline brings purity. Purity brings peace. The children repeated after him. Then I heard my son's voice among them trembling. Discipline brings purity. Purity brings peace. My throat closed. Glenn lifted a hand, and one of the assistants, another adult, a man in a gray jacket, placed something metal on the table. I couldn't see what it was. The flicker of candlelight danced across Glenn's face, and for the first time, his calm expression looked predatory. I shifted to get a better angle, and a dry twig cracked under my shoe. The sound sliced through the silence. A flashlight beam swept across the yard. I ducked low, heart-hammering, crawling behind a pile of fallen boards. The assistant's voice called out, "Who's there?" I pressed my face to the dirt, praying they wouldn't see me. After a few long seconds, the light disappeared and the chanting resumed inside. When I dared to look again, the ritual was still going on, but now Glenn was saying something new. "Tomorrow night, we test the faithful." Liam nodded with the others, his face pale under the candlelight. I backed away slowly until the church was no longer visible. By the time I reached home, my hands were numb. At dawn, I watched Liam come back. His shoes were muddy, his eyes red. He didn't notice me sitting in the shadows of the living room. He walked straight upstairs without a word. I waited until I heard his door close, then whispered to the empty room, "You're not going back there, son. Not ever again." That morning, I couldn't stop shaking. Whatever this discipline was, it wasn't faith. And I knew deep in my gut that if I didn't act soon, I might lose him completely. Morning light filtered weakly through the blinds, pale and cold. I sat at the table waiting for Liam to come downstairs, my coffee untouched. The house was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the old pipes. When he finally appeared, he looked like he hadn't slept at all. Dark circles under his eyes. Lips dry. Fingers twitching as he poured himself cereal. "You're up early?" I said, trying to sound casual. He nodded without looking at me. "Couldn't sleep." His voice cracked. He didn't notice the way I studied his wrists, the faint red marks half hidden under his sleeves. When I reached for the milk, he flinched so subtly I almost missed it. Something in me wanted to shout to demand answers, but I stayed still. "Everything okay at school?" "Yeah," he said. Then, after a pause, "We have a project." "What kind of project?" "Just something for the group." I didn't ask which group, I already knew. After breakfast, I drove him to school. He sat silently, his gaze fixed out the window, watching the fog lift from the trees. The radio played softly, some country singer crooning about redemption, but it only made the silence heavier. When we pulled up to the school gate, I saw a few other kids standing together in the courtyard. They looked at Liam and nodded almost in unison. The kind of look that wasn't friendly or hostile, just knowing. His teacher, Mr. Dalton, waved me down before I drove off. "Mr. Walker," he said, lowering his voice. "Everything all right with Liam?" "He's been quiet lately. His grades are slipping." "I've noticed," I admitted. Dalton frowned. He used to light up during class discussions. Now he just stares at his desk. "Won't even join group work." "I'll talk to him," I said. The teacher nodded, but his expression said he didn't believe it would help. That afternoon, I stopped at the cafe near the church. It was small, the kind of place where the same 4 people sat every morning. Two women were talking by the window, voices low but urgent. "They say Pastor Glenn's group is strict," one said, "but effective. My nephew hasn't talked back once since he joined." The other woman laughed nervously. "They scare the rebellion out of them, that's for sure. Pain teaches obedience, that's what Glenn says." I felt my chest tighten. That phrase, I'd heard it whispered through the basement window. I left the cafe without finishing my coffee. That evening, I made Liam's favorite dinner steak and mashed potatoes. He ate quietly, pushing food around his plate more than eating it. "I talked to your teacher," I said. "He's worried about you. I'm fine. You've been distant. And I know you've been going to that church." He froze his fork halfway to his mouth. "You followed me. I saw you leaving. Late. More than once." He said nothing for a long time, then set the fork down carefully. "He helps us, Dad. Pastor Glenn helps us see the truth. The truth about what's wrong inside us." His tone was flat, almost rehearsed. "Wrong. You're a kid, Liam. There's nothing wrong with you." He met my eyes for the first time, and there was something broken in them. "You wouldn't understand." The way he said it felt like a door slamming shut. After dinner, he disappeared into his room. Hours later, when I went to check on him, the door was locked. I knocked once. "You okay, son?" "I'm fine," came the muffled reply. The word "fine" had lost its meaning in our house. The next morning, I went in after he left for school. I shouldn't have, but fear had already outweighed privacy. His bed was neatly made, too neatly. On the desk sat his sketchbook. I opened it. The first few pages were harmless drawings of mountains, guitars, faces. But as I flipped further, the sketches darkened. Figures kneeling in circles, hands clasped, eyes closed, faces twisted in silent pain. Across one page in bold black ink, the words, "Obedience cleanses. Fear brings purity." My breath caught. The final drawing stopped me cold. A figure that looked like Glenn standing before children kneeling under a cross. Above it, written in a trembling hand, "Brother Glenn's Circle of Light." I closed the notebook and leaned against the wall, shaking. That afternoon, Mrs. Dorsey came by again. Her voice was trembling when she spoke. "Ray, last night I heard them again, singing. It was past midnight. The sound carried all the way to my yard." "Singing?" I asked. "Not singing, chanting, like something out of an old ritual. And I swear I saw one of those kids crying when they left. You need to do something." Her words echoed the same dread I'd been feeling, and I realized this wasn't in my head anymore. It was real. It was happening, and my son was in the middle of it. That night, I sat waiting at the kitchen table, pretending to read the newspaper. When Liam came home, I could tell he sensed something different in the air. "Long day?" I asked. He shrugged. "Just tired." "I found your notebook." He stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes widened just slightly before narrowing again. "You went through my stuff. I had to. I'm worried about you." "You had no right," he shouted, voice breaking with anger or fear. "Then tell me what's going on," I said, standing. "Tell me what they're doing to you down there." He shook his head, tears welling up. "You don't get it. He's trying to fix me. I'm not good enough, and he's helping me be better." My heart broke hearing those words. "No, Liam. That man is twisting your mind. You're already good enough. You're my son." He stared at me like I'd said something foreign, something impossible. "You don't understand, Faith," he whispered, then turned and ran upstairs, slamming the door. I stood there, hands trembling, surrounded by the echoes of my own helplessness. The next morning, when he left for school, I searched his room again, not out of anger, but desperation. I checked under the mattress this time and found something folded in half. A note. The paper was stained with what looked like wax or oil. In red ink it read, "You spoke out of turn. Redemption through silence. Come prepared tonight." The bottom corner carried a circular stamp with a cross through it, the same symbol Glenn wore on his robe. I took a photo of it and slipped it back exactly where I found it. That afternoon, Mrs. Dorsey knocked again, pale and shaken. "They were louder last night," she whispered. "You can't wait any longer. Whatever they're doing to those children, it's getting worse." I thanked her, though my voice shook. "I'll handle it." When Liam came home that evening, I tried one more time. I didn't raise my voice this time. I spoke softly like Helen used to when she wanted me to listen. "Son," I said, "you can tell me anything. You don't need to hide." He stood by the doorway, eyes darting between me and the stairs. "Brother Glenn says doubt is the enemy of truth. And what do you believe?" He hesitated, then whispered, "I believe him." That hurt more than anything he'd said before. He turned and went upstairs. I heard his door close, then lock. I sat down in the dark, hands clenched around my phone, staring at the empty hallway. The house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by fear and silence. When the clock struck 11, I heard movement again. The creak of his door's soft footsteps, then the faint click of the back door unlocking. I stood in the shadows letting him go, because this time I had a plan. If my son wouldn't tell me the truth, I would find it myself. And I would never ever let him face that darkness alone again. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the basement, the candles, and my son's face under that flickering light. When morning came, I was already dressed, sitting at the table with the laptop open. 2 tabs glowed on the screen, one for the local electronics store, another for the church's website. I stared at the picture of Pastor Glenn smiling beside a quote that read, "Discipline is the heart of salvation." It made my stomach turn. I clicked over to the electronics site. Cameras, recorders, motion sensors, it was all there. I hesitated, hand hovering over the trackpad. The idea of spying on my own son felt wrong, but losing him felt worse. I whispered to myself, "I just need to know the truth." Then I shut the laptop, grabbed my jacket, and drove into town. The shop was nearly empty when I walked in. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and the smell of new plastic hung in the air. A young clerk in a blue polo shirt looked up from the counter. "Morning, sir. What can I help you with?" I cleared my throat. "I need a camera. Small, something discreet. For home security, something like that." He led me to a display shelf lined with gadgets, some disguised as clocks, others hidden inside smoke detectors. "This one has night vision," he said, pointing to a tiny lens tucked inside a cube no bigger than a matchbox. "Connects to your phone. Motion detection, full audio." I stared at it for a moment before nodding. "I'll take it." He smiled politely, scanning the box. "Catching a thief. Something like that?" I muttered again, forcing a smile. When I got home, the house was silent. Liam was still at school, and that gave me just enough time. I stood in his doorway for a long while, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. His room looked ordinary, posters, books, sketch pads, but something about it felt colder now, heavier. I sat on the edge of his bed, remembering when he was small, and used to crawl up beside me during thunderstorms, saying, "You're my safe place, Dad." I unpacked the camera with shaking hands. It was so small it looked harmless. I found a spot high on his bookshelf, between a stack of old board games and a wooden model of a plane we'd built together years ago. The lens was nearly invisible. I linked it to my phone and tested it. The feed appeared instantly. The room looked normal through the screen, only the edges tinted in gray from the shadows. "I'm sorry, son," I whispered. "I just need to protect you." The front door opened downstairs. Panic shot through me. I stuffed the camera box into my jacket and turned as Liam's footsteps came up the stairs. "Hey, Dad," he said, stopping at the door. "Hey, buddy, just fixing that shelf of yours." It was leaning. He nodded, his eyes flicking to the bookshelf, then back to me. "Thanks, no problem. How was school?" "Fine," he said, already walking past me. He closed the door gently behind him. That night I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, waiting. My heart pounded as I opened the camera app. The live feed appeared Liam's room dim in the glow of his desk lamp. He was sitting at his desk, his back to the camera, flipping through a small notebook. He wrote something down, then placed a silver cross necklace over the page. He whispered softly, "I'll make you proud, Brother Glenn." My stomach dropped. He stood, slipped on his jacket, and tucked the notebook into his backpack. Then he turned to the mirror, staring at himself for a long time, before whispering, "Discipline brings purity." I couldn't breathe. The words I'd seen in that sketchbook, the ones written over and over, were now spilling from his lips like a prayer. He knelt by his bed for a few seconds, his lips moving soundlessly, and then he got up, opened the door, and left. The camera feed showed the room empty still. I grabbed my keys and followed minutes later, but when I reached the church, the basement was dark and silent. He was gone. When I got home, the feed was still open. I sat watching the static shadows dance across the room. Then for a split second, something moved. A shape, just a blur, crossed the far wall. Not Liam. Something taller. My pulse quickened. I replayed it twice, but the shadow disappeared. I told myself it was a glitch, a trick of light. But I didn't believe it. The next morning, I watched him come down for breakfast. He looked drained eyes, glassy skin pale. "Rough night?" I asked. He nodded, eating slowly. "Had a test today, didn't sleep much." "Where's your notebook?" I asked lightly. He froze for half a second. "Left it at school." I smiled faintly, pretending to believe him. "Try to rest after class, okay? Yeah." When he left, I checked the camera footage again. The video had recorded movement around 3:30 in the morning. Liam had returned, limping slightly. He sat on the bed, hands trembling. From his pocket, he pulled out a folded paper, creased and dirty, with a red symbol stamped at the top, a circle surrounding a cross. He unfolded it and whispered, "Forgive me, Lord. I failed." Then he tore the paper into small pieces and threw them in the trash. I watched, unable to move, my throat dry as dust. When he left for school later, I went into his room again. The trash can still held the torn fragments. I pieced them together on the desk. It wasn't a letter, it was a form. A purity pledge. The name Faith Discipline Club, printed neatly at the top. There were several boxes with check marks beside them, confession, punishment, renewal. At the bottom, under the red symbol, was the phrase, "Silence is strength." My hands shook as I took a photo and reassembled the scraps to look untouched. That evening, I tried to act normal. We ate dinner quietly. He looked exhausted, barely speaking. I forced myself to stay calm. "You okay, son?" He nodded faintly. "Just tired." "Are you sure?" His eyes flicked up briefly, meeting mine. For a heartbeat, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who used to laugh until he cried over burnt pancakes and bad jokes. Then the look vanished. "I'm fine," he said. After he went upstairs, I checked the camera again. Midnight came and the notification buzzed, motion detected. My hands trembled as I tapped the screen. The feed showed him sitting on the floor beside his bed, whispering to himself. Then his head snapped up suddenly, as if he'd heard something. His eyes shifted toward the door, but he didn't move. Slowly, his lips formed the words, "I'll do better tonight." I pressed record, my heart pounding. He stood, slipped on his jacket, and reached into his backpack. When he pulled out the cross necklace, I noticed a faint mark on his palm. A raw red welt, shaped like the same symbol from the paper. He left the room again, and the screen went dark. I waited, staring at that empty frame, for hours. Around 4 in the morning, movement flickered again. He returned limping more than before, his hands trembling. He pulled off his jacket, revealing the same bruise on his wrist I'd seen earlier, darker now. He whispered, "Don't tell him I was weak." Then he lay down, pulling the blanket to his chin like a small child, and closed his eyes. I turned off the screen, my whole body shaking. When I saw him the next morning, sitting at the table eating cereal like nothing had happened, I wanted to tell him I knew. I wanted to promise him I'd fix it all. But instead, I sat across from him in silence, pretending everything was fine. Because deep down, I knew I was already too late. That night before bed, I checked the footage one last time. The final few seconds made my blood run cold. The camera had switched on by itself around 10 p.m., even though Liam was still home. For a moment there was movement in the corner of the room, someone stepping briefly into frame. A shadow, taller than Liam, still watching. Then the feed cut to black. The following morning, I drove Liam to school, pretending not to notice the bruises hidden under his sleeve. He stared out the window, pale and silent, the same way he had for weeks. The radio filled the silence, but even the sound of music felt wrong. As we passed the church, he tensed. His hand twitched on his lap like the very sight of that building triggered something deep inside him. "You're quiet today," I said softly. "I'm fine," he murmured, eyes fixed on the road. When we stopped at the curb, he opened the door quickly. "I'll walk home after class," he added, before I could answer, then disappeared into the crowd. I sat there for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The image from the camera replayed in my head, the figure standing in his room, watching. It hadn't been my imagination. Someone else had been inside my house. I drove to the police station around noon. Officer Mira Lopez, the detective who'd handled my truck break-in a few years back, still worked there. She had a reputation for being straightforward, the kind of cop who actually listened. I waited until she finished with another visitor, then approached. "Detective Lopez," I said quietly. "I need to report something. Strange." She looked up, studying my face for a moment. "Mr. Walker? Haven't seen you in a while. What's going on?" "It's my son," I said. "He's been sneaking out at night. I found out he's been going to the old Salem church, and there's more. I think someone's been in my house." Her brows furrowed. "In your house, you mean a break-in?" "Not exactly. I set up a camera in my son's room. I know how that sounds, but I was worried about him. I caught something. Someone standing in his room at night, watching." She motioned for me to sit. "You did the right thing coming here. Do you have the footage?" I nodded, showing her the clip on my phone. She watched silently, her expression hardening, as the shadow moved across the frame. "Jesus," she whispered. "You can't see the face, but this isn't just trespassing. That church, that's Glenn Morton's group, isn't it? You know about him." "Enough," she said grimly. "He's been on our radar for a while, but no one's pressed charges. Parents defend him. Kids refuse to talk. Cults like this survive because people are too scared or too ashamed to admit what's really happening." I felt a flicker of hope. "Then help me stop him." She leaned forward. "I will. But we need solid proof, names, dates, physical evidence. The footage is a start, but it won't be enough for a warrant. If you can get something connecting him directly to the abuse, we can move fast." "I'll get it," I said. She studied me for a moment before nodding. "Be careful, Mr. Walker. People like Glenn don't just manipulate kids, they control communities." When I got home, I replayed her words in my head. Control communities. She was right. Salem was small, tightly knit, built on faith and routine. People would rather ignore evil than admit it lived among them. I checked the camera feed that night before Liam came home. The timestamp showed new motion around 3 in the afternoon, a short burst of static, then blackness. When the image returned, the angle was slightly different. The camera had been moved. Cold dread crawled up my spine. Someone knew. When Liam walked in later, I pretended to be reading at the kitchen table. "How was school?" I asked. "Fine." He went to his room immediately, and a minute later I heard the faint sound of his door locking. After dinner, I knocked softly. "Hey, you hungry?" "No, thanks." "Want to watch a movie later?" No answer. I stood there staring at the door, listening to the faint rustle of movement inside. He wasn't ignoring me. He was afraid. The next morning, I called Lopez again. "Someone found the camera," I said. "Are you sure it's been moved?" "And I think my son knows I'm onto him. I need to do something before tonight." "Let me dig," she replied. "If I find anything on Glenn, I'll call you right away." But Ray, don't confront him alone. I promised her I wouldn't, but deep down, I already knew I would. That night, I sat in the dark waiting. The minutes dragged like hours. At 11:12, the notification buzzed, motion detected. I opened the feed, my stomach twisting. Liam was standing by the window, fully dressed, clutching his backpack. He looked terrified. I saw him whisper something to himself, then cross himself quickly before leaving the room. I threw on my coat and followed from a distance. The night air was colder than usual, a thin fog hanging over the road. He walked quickly, never looking back. I followed him past the park through the narrow alley that led to the church. The basement door was already open when he arrived. Two men stood outside, both dressed in dark clothes, faces half hidden by shadows. One of them placed a hand on Liam's shoulder, guiding him inside. I crept closer until I could hear voices, not chants this time, but conversation. "Tonight we see if he's ready," a deep voice said. "Brother Glenn won't accept weakness." "He won't fail again," the other man replied. "He's learned." I peeked through the window, heart hammering. Inside, candles flickered around a stone altar. Glenn stood at the front, his robe gleaming in the dim light. Liam and 5 other kids knelt before him. "Fear is a gift," Glenn said softly, his voice echoing through the basement. "It reminds us that pain purifies the soul." The children repeated his words in unison. Then he pointed to my son. "Step forward, Liam." My breath caught. Liam hesitated. I want to, Brother Glenn, but I don't feel ready." Glenn smiled, slow, patient, predatory. "Fear means your heart is soft. Tonight we make it strong." He lifted a small metal rod from the altar. Its end glowed faintly red from the candle flame. The children's eyes were wide with dread. I felt my entire body go cold. "Hold out your hand," Glenn said. "No," I whispered from outside, fists clenched. "Don't." But inside, Liam obeyed. Glenn pressed the rod gently against his palm, not long enough to burn deep, but enough to make him gasp in pain. "Pain cleanses," Glenn said. "Obedience redeems." The others repeated it. I wanted to run in to tear him away, but Lopez's voice echoed in my mind. "Don't confront him alone." I raised my phone, hit record, and filmed everything I could. When Glenn finally released Liam, he smiled like a proud teacher. "Tomorrow night, you'll take the vow. After that, you'll belong entirely to the light." I backed away, my heart pounding so hard it felt like thunder in my ears. As soon as I reached the truck, I called Lopez. "Detective, I have it. I have proof. He's branding kids, burning them." "Ray, listen to me carefully," she said, her voice tight. "Get your son out of there right now. I'm calling for a warrant and backup. Don't engage unless you have no choice." I hung up and looked toward the church. The basement light flickered like fire against the walls. My hands shook as I started the engine. I was done waiting. I wasn't going to let another night pass while my son was being tortured in the name of faith. I drove toward the church, headlights off, heart hammering in my chest. Inside, the chant started again, soft at first, then louder. I parked behind the shed, gripping the steering wheel. I whispered into the darkness, "Hold on, Liam. I'm coming." The fog rolled thick over the empty fields as I parked a block away from the church. I killed the headlights, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The old wooden building stood in the distance, half shrouded in mist, its basement windows glowing faintly orange. From here I could already hear the chanting, low, steady, and cold as the air itself. I checked my phone, hit record, and whispered, "It ends tonight." The grass was wet under my boots as I moved closer, crouching low behind a row of broken gravestones. Every breath came out in a thin white cloud. I could see them now through the basement window, figures moving in a circle. Pastor Glenn stood at the center, his robe gleaming under candlelight. The cross embroidered on his chest looked almost alive in the flicker of flame. Liam was there too, kneeling near the front head, bowed shoulders, trembling. I edged closer until I could hear the words clearly. "Pain is truth. Truth is obedience." The children repeated it, voices flat, mechanical. Glenn paced slowly among them, tapping his staff against the stone floor. "Tomorrow," he said, "those who have passed their trials will be purified forever." My stomach twisted. Purified. That word felt like poison. I raised my phone to film zooming in on Glenn's face. He smiled faintly as he rested his hand on Liam's shoulder. "You were weak last night, my boy, but weakness can be forgiven. You understand now, don't you?" Liam nodded quickly, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, Brother Glenn." The sight of my son kneeling before that monster nearly broke me. I had to force myself to stay hidden to keep recording. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I froze. A flashlight beam cut through the fog, sweeping across the grass. One of Glenn's assistants was patrolling. I ducked behind the shed, holding my breath as the light passed within inches of my face. For a moment it stopped lingering on the ground where I had crouched a second earlier. Then the beam shifted and moved away. When I looked again through the window, Glenn was finishing the ritual. "Go home and rest," he said to the children. "The light has much work for you tomorrow." Liam stood slowly, his hands shaking. Glenn leaned close to him and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then the pastor placed a small object, a piece of paper maybe, into his hand. Liam nodded, eyes down, and followed the others out through the back exit. I stayed still until the candles began to dim. Then I crept closer, pressed my ear to the wall, and heard muffled voices, Glenn and his assistant. "He's ready," Glenn said. "Tomorrow night we'll bind him for good." "He's been asking questions," the assistant replied. "About his father." Glenn chuckled. "Doubt is a test. By tomorrow, he'll forget his father ever mattered." The words hit me like a hammer. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. My son's faith had been twisted into obedience. I pulled out my phone and called Detective Lopez. It rang 3 times before she answered, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Walker, I'm at the church," I whispered. "I saw everything. He's planning something tomorrow night, an initiation. You need to stop it now." "Do you have footage?" "Yes, enough to get him arrested." "Send it to me right now," she said. I forwarded the video. "Stay put, but don't engage. We'll need a warrant. If you confront him, he could hurt your son or you." "I can't just wait," I said. "You have to. Please let me handle this legally." But her voice faded into the background as I stared at the church, anger flooding through me. When I returned home, the clock read nearly 3 in the morning. The house was dark and silent. I went straight to Liam's room. He was there sitting on his bed with the same folded paper Glenn had given him. He didn't notice me at first. "Son," I said softly. He jumped, clutching the paper to his chest. "Dad, you scared me. Where were you at a study group?" "Don't lie to me." My voice came out sharper than I intended. He He froze, eyes darting to the camera shelf where the small lens blinked red. "You're watching me because I'm scared for you." "You shouldn't be," he shouted, suddenly standing. "He's helping me. He says you don't understand what faith really means. He's using you, Liam. He's hurting you and calling it faith." Liam's lip trembled, but he didn't back down. "You don't get it. I need this. I need to be clean." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "You're already good, son. You always were. He's making you believe you're broken so he can control you." He shook his head, tears forming in his eyes. "You don't understand." He pushed past me and ran into the hall. "Just leave me alone." His door slammed. I stood there trembling. The rage in his voice wasn't his. It belonged to someone else. Someone who'd put it there. At dawn, after hours of pacing, I called Lopez again. "I can't let him go back tonight," I said. "Then don't," she replied. "Keep him home. I've spoken with the DA. We're fast-tracking the warrant. By tomorrow we'll have Glenn. Tomorrow might be too late." "Ray," she said firmly, "trust me. I'll bring him down. You just keep your son safe tonight." But that morning, when I checked Liam's room, he was gone. The bed was unmade, the window cracked open. On the pillow lay a note written in shaky handwriting. "Don't follow me. I have to finish what I started." Panic seized me. I called Lopez immediately. "He's gone," I said. She cursed under her breath. "Stay where you are. I'll send a patrol car." No, I interrupted. "I know where he's going. Ray, don't do this alone." But I'd already grabbed my keys and was out the door. The drive to the church felt endless. The sky was still gray, streaked with pink. My mind raced through every possible outcome. If Glenn touched him again, I'd know. I couldn't even finish that thought. When I reached the hill overlooking the church, I killed the engine and scanned the yard. The basement door was open, candlelight flickering inside. I stepped out quietly, phone in one hand, flashlight in the other. My breath came shallow and fast. The chanting had started again, louder this time, rhythmic and deep. I crouched by the basement window and looked inside. Glenn stood before a wooden cross, his hands raised. The children knelt behind him, and there Liam, trembling, holding a candle in both hands. Glenn's voice boomed, "Tonight we cast out the last of your doubt. Tonight you are reborn." He gestured to one of the assistants, who brought forward a small bowl filled with water and something red blood, maybe. Glenn dipped his fingers in and drew a symbol on Liam's forehead. I felt my entire body go cold. "Do you accept the light?" Glenn asked. Liam whispered, "Yes, Brother Glenn." "Then rise and receive your mark." He turned toward the altar, reaching for the same metal rod I'd seen before. That was the moment I moved. I kicked open the basement door, the sound cracking through the chanting like thunder. "Step away from him." Glenn spun, shock flashing across his face before twisting into fury. "You don't belong here." "I'm his father," I said, my voice shaking but loud. "And you're done." Liam stared at me, frozen. Glenn lifted the rod, pointing it at me like a weapon. "You dare interrupt the cleansing." I raised my phone. "It's over. You're being recorded. The police are coming." For a moment, no one moved. Then the sirens cut through the night air, faint but growing closer. Glenn's face turned pale. He dropped the rod, his composure shattering. "Dad," Liam whispered. "Come here, son," I said softly. He ran into my arms, sobbing as the basement filled with flashing red and blue light. The officers stormed in moments later, shouting commands. Glenn tried to flee through the back exit, but was tackled before he reached the stairs. When Lopez entered, flashlight in hand, she gave me a single nod. "You did the right thing, Ray." I held Liam tighter, feeling him shake against me. Outside, the first light of morning touched the church windows. It was over, or at least I hoped it was. But as they led Glenn away in handcuffs, his voice echoed through the cold dawn. "You can't save them all, Mr. Walker. The faithful never die." I looked down at my son's tear-streaked face and whispered, "You're wrong." Then I led Liam out into the morning air away from the place that had stolen our nights. The flashing red and blue lights bathed the church walls in color as I stood outside with Liam clinging to me. The air smelled like rain and candle wax. Officers moved quickly in and out of the basement, taking photos gathering what little evidence hadn't already been burned or hidden. Glenn was handcuffed, sitting on the steps with a blanket around his shoulders, his head bowed like a defeated prophet. But there was no remorse in his eyes, only cold calculation. Liam trembled in my arms. "He said he could make me better," he whispered, voice barely audible over the chaos. "He said you wouldn't understand." I brushed the hair from his forehead and kissed the side of his head. "He was wrong, son. He's not God. He's a monster." Officer Lopez approached, clipboard in hand. Her eyes softened when she looked at Liam. "Paramedics are here. Let's get him checked out." Liam shook his head. "I'm fine." Lopez crouched beside him. "You're brave," she said. "But brave doesn't mean you're not hurt. We'll just make sure, okay?" He hesitated, then nodded. The paramedic guided him toward the ambulance, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. I watched him climb inside and felt a mix of anger and relief wash over me so heavy it nearly dropped me to my knees. Ray Lopez said quietly, pulling me aside, "You got here just in time." "If you hadn't gone in, don't," I said. I almost didn't. I almost believed it was all in my head. She glanced back at the church. We found restraints in one of the back rooms, and notes, rules, punishments, lists of names. "There are at least 12 kids involved. Maybe more." The words made me sick. "You think their parents knew? Some maybe. Most probably didn't want to know." She sighed. "We'll get statements from everyone. But you and your son, you'll need protection for a while. People like Glenn always have followers." I looked at the church one last time. The cross above the door glowed faintly in the flashing lights, tilted at an angle like it was ashamed of what it had seen. "Let them come," I said quietly. "They'll never touch him again." At the hospital, Liam sat on the exam table while a nurse cleaned the burn on his palm. He winced, but didn't cry. When she left us alone, he stared at the floor and whispered, "Dad, am I bad?" My chest tightened. "What?" "No. Why would you think that Brother Glenn said I was full of darkness? That I needed pain to make it go away?" I knelt in front of him. "Look at me, Liam. You don't have darkness in you. You have light. You always did. He wanted you to believe you were broken, so he could control you. But you're not broken, okay?" Tears filled his eyes. But I believed him. "That's not your fault. It's his." I reached up and held his face gently. "You were just a kid who wanted to be good." He nodded weakly, and I pulled him into a hug. For the first time in months, he didn't resist. He clung to me like a drowning boy, holding onto a lifeboat. When we left the hospital near dawn, the first pale light was stretching over the horizon. The air smelled like rain-soaked soil and smoke from the church candles. I didn't realize until then how heavy the air around that town had always felt, like everyone had been holding their breath for too long. We drove home in silence. Liam sat with his blanket around him, staring out the window. When we passed the church, police tape flapped in the wind, and I saw Glenn in the back of a squad car staring straight ahead, his lips moving soundlessly. Liam turned away, pressing his forehead against the glass. "He's praying," he said quietly. "Let him," I replied. "He's going to need it." Back home, I helped Liam upstairs and made sure he lay down. He looked smaller than ever, like a shadow of the boy he used to be. "Can you stay?" he asked softly. always. I sat beside the bed until he drifted off, the rise and fall of his breathing the only sound in the room. I hadn't realized until then how much I'd missed that simple rhythm, the proof that he was still here, still alive. When the sun was up, Lopez called. "We've got him booked," she said. "Glenn's facing charges for assault, unlawful imprisonment, and coercion. It'll stick. The evidence is strong." I exhaled slowly. "Good. There's more. We found recordings in his office, journals. He documented everything, every ritual, every lesson. It's horrifying, but it'll help the case." I swallowed hard. "And the other kids? They're safe, for now. Child Services will handle it." "But Ray, this isn't over. The church board is already trying to spin the story. They're saying Glenn was misunderstood, that it was just unorthodox guidance." My hands tightened around the phone. "He burned my son." "I know," she said gently. "And the court will know too. But it's going to take time. Until then, keep your doors locked. I'll send a patrol by every night." I thanked her and hung up. When I turned, Liam was standing in the doorway, his blanket trailing behind him. "Is he going to jail?" he asked. "Yes. For how long, I don't know yet." He nodded, then walked over to the window, pulling the curtain aside. Outside, a single police car idled by the curb. He stared at it for a long moment before saying, "He said I'd never be free of him, that he'd always be in my head." I walked over and put my hand on his shoulder. "He'll only stay there if you let him. And I'll help you make sure he never does." He leaned into me silent for a long time. Then he whispered, "It's weird. I keep hearing his voice when I close my eyes." "That'll fade," I said. "And when it does, you'll hear mine instead, telling you you're safe." He smiled faintly, the first real smile I'd seen in weeks. "Okay, Dad." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, staring at the flickering streetlight outside. Every sound made me tense, the creak of the house, the hum of the fridge, the wind tapping at the window. When my phone buzzed, I almost dropped it. It was Lopez. "They're transferring Glenn to county jail tonight. Stay alert. His followers might not take it well." I typed back, "Understood." I checked the locks again, then stood by Liam's door, listening to his steady breathing. For the first time, he was sleeping without nightmares. I turned off the hallway light and went back to my chair. Hours passed in quiet. Then, somewhere around 3 a.m, there was a noise outside, a car engine idling too long, doors shutting. I grabbed the flashlight and went to the window. The police cruiser was still there, lights off, but behind it, another car sat in the dark, engine humming. The door opened. 2 silhouettes stepped out, both wearing dark jackets. They looked at my house, whispered something, then got back in the car and drove away. I didn't move until their taillights vanished into the fog. The next morning, Lopez came by. "We've got reports of people circling the neighborhood," she said. "Probably loyalists from Glenn's group. We're keeping watch." I nodded, exhausted. "He's not going to win again." "He won't," she said firmly, "but stay ready." After she left, I went upstairs. Liam was sitting on his bed, sunlight pouring through the window. He looked at me and smiled weakly. "You look tired." "Maybe just old," I said, sitting beside him. He laughed, a small broken sound that still managed to warm the room. Outside, the day was bright and silent. For the first time in months, there were no shadows at our door, no whispers in the dark. Just a father and a son trying to find their way back to the light. The morning after Glenn's arrest, the town felt eerily calm. The headlines had already spread, "Local pastor arrested for child abuse and coercion," and every cafe, grocery line, and church parking lot was buzzing with whispers. I saw my own reflection on the front page of the local paper, standing beside Detective Lopez, eyes hollow and sleepless. Beneath it, the caption read, "Father exposes cult-like church operation in Salem." I folded the paper and tossed it into the trash. The words didn't feel like victory. They felt like ashes. Liam sat at the kitchen table, his cereal untouched, staring into the milk like it might tell him what came next. He looked smaller somehow, fragile, in a way that broke me every time I looked at him. "School called," I said softly. "They're giving you a few more days before you go back." He nodded without looking up. "People will know, won't they?" "Yes. But none of this is your fault." He pushed the bowl away. "It feels like it." I walked around the table and put a hand on his shoulder. The only person who should feel guilty is sitting in a jail cell. His lips trembled, but he didn't cry. He hadn't since that night. He'd just gone quiet, as if he was saving his tears for when he was alone. Later that morning, I met Lopez at the precinct. She was already waiting with a folder thick with papers and photographs. "Morning, Ray," she greeted. "You holding up barely?" She handed me a cup of coffee. "The case is moving fast. We've confirmed victims in 3 counties. Your footage started a chain reaction. Families are coming forward. Some of those kids were too scared to talk until now." I stared at the table. Good. They deserve to be heard. Lopez opened the folder, showing me bank records, donation logs, and a list of church board members. This wasn't just Glenn. He had help. There's money moving through shell accounts tied to local officials and 2 neighboring parishes. We're going after all of them. I felt a flicker of anger ignite again. How long have they been covering for him? Years, maybe decades. We found letters from previous congregations, always the same story. Complaints buried, victims silenced. She paused, meeting my eyes. "But this time it's different. You made sure the evidence couldn't disappear." I thought about the camera sitting on my desk at home, the same one that had captured my son's suffering. "I didn't do it for headlines." "I know," she said. "But sometimes justice needs someone willing to bleed for it." We spent the next few hours reviewing evidence, connecting the dots between Glenn's sermons, the hidden donations, and the discipline retreats where he isolated children. By the time we finished, my mind felt heavy. As I was leaving, Lopez stopped me at the door. "One more thing. There's a press conference tonight at City Hall. The DA wants you there. You don't have to speak, but your presence matters." I hesitated. "I'm not good with cameras." "You don't need to be," she said. "Just stand there. People need to see the truth standing tall." That night, the town square was packed. Reporters, police, parents, even people who had once called Glenn their spiritual guide filled the steps of City Hall. I stood beside Lopez, under the glaring lights, my hands sweating. The DA spoke first, announcing the charges. Assault, coercion, child endangerment, conspiracy, each word falling like a hammer. Then, Lopez took the podium. "These crimes were hidden behind scripture and community trust," she said firmly. "But one man's courage gave a voice to the voiceless. Mr. Walker, please step forward." I froze for half a second. Cameras flashed. My throat felt dry as sand, but I stepped up anyway. "I'm not a hero," I began, my voice rough. "I'm just a father who stopped looking away." The crowd was silent. Even the reporters lowered their microphones a little. What happened to my son wasn't faith, it was control. It was abuse wrapped in prayer. And if you think something like this can't happen in your town, you're wrong. It hides behind smiles, handshakes, and Sunday service. I looked at the sea of faces in front of me, parents clutching their children's hands tighter. If your gut tells you something's wrong, listen. If your child is afraid, believe them. Don't let fear or pride keep you silent, because silence is what monsters like Glenn count on. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. My son will spend years healing from what that man did. I will spend the rest of my life making sure no other child has to." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then strong. Lopez put a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "You did good." After the conference, I found Liam waiting outside in the car. He looked nervous. "Did you say something?" "Yeah. What did you say? That we're not afraid anymore?" He nodded, staring out the windshield. "I wish I could have been brave like you." I smiled sadly. "You were son. You survived him. That's more courage than most men ever find." He leaned his head back against the seat, eyes closed. "Can we go home?" "Yeah. Let's go home." The next few days passed quietly. Lopez kept me updated. The case was expanding, new witnesses testifying every day. But peace didn't come easily. I caught Liam waking up at night, breathing fast, whispering prayers he barely remembered. I'd sit by his bed until he calmed down, stroking his hair the way Helen used to. One afternoon, I took him to see Dr. Ramirez, a child psychologist Lopez had recommended. The office smelled faintly of lavender and coffee. Dr. Ramirez greeted Liam warmly, showing him her therapy room filled with sketch pads, books, and soft light. I waited outside while they talked. When she came out an hour later, her expression was kind but serious. "He's been through something deep," she said. "It'll take time, but he's already showing signs of strength. He trusts you completely. That's rare after trauma like this." I swallowed hard. "He's all I've got." She smiled gently. "Then you're already halfway there." That night after dinner, Liam and I sat on the porch. The air was cool, the stars sharp and bright. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "Do you think people like him ever stop believing they're right?" "No," I said. "But I think the rest of us learn to stop believing them." He was quiet again, then turned to me. "Can I sleep in your room tonight?" "Of course." He smiled faintly, and for the first time his eyes looked alive again. When we went inside, my phone buzzed a message from Lopez. "We're filing additional charges. Glenn's lawyer is collapsing under pressure. It's almost over." Almost. I set the phone down and watched Liam curl under the blanket, asleep within minutes. Outside, the world felt a little lighter. Before turning off the light, I whispered a quiet prayer, not to any god or church, but to something simpler. Let this be the beginning of peace. Then I lay down beside my son, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, we'd face it together. The days that followed felt like a blur of headlines, phone calls, and paperwork. Reporters wouldn't stop calling. The local paper ran new updates every morning, and the town of Salem, once quiet, tight-knit, and deeply faithful, had become a battlefield of opinions. Some people called me a hero. Others whispered that I had destroyed the church. But none of it mattered. I wasn't looking for thanks. I just wanted peace. Liam spent most of his time inside reading or drawing the same quiet sketches that once filled his notebooks. His drawings looked different now, lighter, full of open skies and trees instead of shadows and crosses. He was healing slowly, but the fear still lingered behind his eyes. One evening, Detective Lopez stopped by the house. She looked exhausted, but determined. "We finally got the full statement from Glenn's assistant," she said, setting a folder on the table. "It's worse than we thought. He kept journals, recorded conversations, and stored everything in hidden drives. This wasn't just abuse, it was organized control." I rubbed my temples. "And the people who helped him. 2 councilmen are under investigation for covering up donations. We also found proof that several local business owners funded the faith discipline program. But the best part is Glenn himself," he cracked. I looked up sharply. He confessed, not exactly. He tried to justify it. She opened the folder to a transcript. He said they needed structure. Their parents were too weak. I gave them order. I felt my stomach twist. He still believes he's a savior. Lopez nodded. Men like him always do. But the evidence is undeniable now. We've got recordings, bank trails, testimony. He'll spend the rest of his life behind bars. I exhaled slowly. Good. She gave me a tired smile. You should come to the courthouse tomorrow. The DA's holding a final review before the official hearing. They'll want to acknowledge you and the other families. I don't need that, I said. Maybe not, she replied. But it might help the others to see the man who started it all. That night after she left, I sat on the porch watching the stars while Liam slept. The town was quiet for once. No cars passing, no wind in the trees. Just silence, the kind I hadn't heard in months. I thought about what Lopez said. Maybe being there wasn't about me. Maybe it was about showing those kids and their parents that the nightmare could end. The next morning, the courthouse was crowded. Reporters, parents, victims, all gathered in the marble hall, faces tense but hopeful. I spotted Mrs. Dorsey in the corner, clutching her purse, tears glistening in her eyes when she saw me. You did it, Ray, she said softly. You really did. I shook my head. We all did. Glenn sat at the front, flanked by deputies. His once pristine hair was disheveled, his hands cuffed, but his eyes burned with the same unsettling calm. When the prosecutor read the list of charges, he didn't flinch. He only smiled faintly, like a man listening to a sermon meant for someone else. When my turn came to give a statement, my legs felt heavy. I stood, took the microphone, and looked straight at him. You told those children pain was love. I said, my voice shaking. You called it faith. You told them obedience was salvation, when really it was your prison. You broke them, and you called it discipline. But they're free now. You lost. For the first time, I saw his expression falter. His lips twitched. His eyes narrowed. The judge called for order, and I sat back down. Lopez gave me a nod from across the room. Afterward, outside the courthouse, the air was thick with rain. Cameras flashed as I stepped into the crowd. A reporter shoved a microphone toward me. Mr. Walker, how does it feel knowing Pastor Glenn might spend life in prison? I paused. It doesn't feel like winning, I said simply. It feels like surviving. That quote ran in the next morning's paper under a photo of me walking through the rain with Liam by my side. Weeks passed. The trial moved into its final phase, and life slowly returned to something resembling normal. Lopez stopped by less often, though she'd send the occasional message, case moving well. More victims coming forward. You did the right thing. But even as justice took its course, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unfinished. There were nights I'd wake up and think I heard whispering in the hall, only to realize it was just the wind. Once I found a flyer taped to my door that read, "The faithful will rise again." I showed it to Lopez, who frowned, but told me not to worry. Empty threats, she said. They always make noise before fading. Still, I couldn't rest easy. One night, about a month after the trial began, I was sorting through the files I'd saved, photos, video evidence, transcripts, when I noticed something strange. In one of the recordings from the church basement, just after I'd burst in that final night, a voice could be heard behind Glenn's shouts. It wasn't a child's voice, it was a woman's. She said, "You promised me he'd be safe." I paused the video, rewound. It played it again. The words were faint, but unmistakable. The next morning, I brought the clip to Lopez. She listened through her headphones, then frowned. "That's not from the congregation," she said. "That voice doesn't match any of the victims." "Then who is it?" She leaned back in her chair. "Maybe another accomplice, or someone he used." She scribbled a note. "I'll have our tech team clean up the audio. If there's more there, we'll find it." That night, I lay awake thinking about that voice. A mother, maybe, who believed him. Someone who handed over her child thinking it was the right thing. The idea made my skin crawl. The next day, Lopez called. We identified her. Her name's Margaret Hill. She disappeared a year ago. Glenn reported her as having moved to another town. Jesus, I whispered. He kept her there, didn't he? Most likely. But we're still searching for remains. If she's gone, we'll charge him with more than just abuse. For the first time, the thought of Glenn dying in prison didn't feel enough. It would never balance what he'd taken. That evening, Liam came into the living room holding one of his drawings. It showed two figures standing under a sunrise, a father and son hand in hand. "Can you hang this up?" he asked. I smiled, taking it carefully. Of course. As I pinned it to the wall, I realized how far we'd come and how much further we had to go. The house still carried the echoes of what had happened. But in the small things, the laughter at breakfast, the sound of pencils scratching on paper, the smell of pancakes. Again, I could feel the world stitching itself back together. A few days later, the verdict came in. Guilty on all counts. Glenn was sentenced to life without parole. When Lopez called to tell me, her voice sounded lighter than it had in months. "It's done, Ray," she said. I looked at Liam, sitting on the porch, sunlight glinting off his hair as he fed scraps of bread to a stray dog that had started following us home. "No," I said quietly. "It's just beginning." She didn't understand what I meant, but I did. Justice might have closed the case, but healing, real healing, was a lifelong sentence of its own. That night, for the first time since it all began, I slept without fear. The camera on the bookshelf was gone. The house was quiet. And when I woke before dawn, I saw my son standing at the window watching the sky turn gold. He turned to me and smiled. "It's morning, Dad." "Yes," I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. "It really is." Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, spilling across the table where Liam sat eating pancakes. For the first time in a long time, his laughter filled the house like it used to. He was telling me about a video he'd watched for school, a science project about the stars, and the way his eyes lit up when he spoke made me forget for a few precious seconds everything we'd been through. When the phone rang, the sound jolted me back. It was Lopez. Her tone was calm but firm. "Ray, it's official. Glenn's been moved to a federal facility. He's not coming back." I looked out the window. The sky was clear, the same blue it used to be before the storm. "Good," I said quietly. "Still," she added, "the press won't let this go anytime soon. You might want to prepare. They'll call, maybe even come by. I'm not giving any more interviews." "I figured as much," she said with a small laugh. "You've earned your peace." After we hung up, I went back to the table. Liam looked at me curiously. "Was that her?" "Yeah," I said. "She says it's over." He nodded, pushing the last bite of pancake around his plate. "Then why do you look sad?" I hesitated. "Because endings aren't always happy, even when they're right." He frowned thoughtfully, then went back to eating. That afternoon, I took him to the park. The same one near the church, though now it looked different. Bright open, filled with people again. The police tape was long gone. Volunteers had repainted the benches and planted new flowers. Families walked along the paths. Life had returned. Liam ran ahead, chasing a soccer ball a group of kids had kicked too far. When he passed Mrs. Dorsey, she waved from her bench. "He's looking better, Ray," she said when I approached. "He's stronger than I'll ever be," I replied. She nodded. "You both are. You gave this town back its courage." I didn't know how to answer that. I wasn't a hero. I was just a father who had finally done what he should have done sooner. That evening after dinner, Liam sat at his desk sketching. I peeked over his shoulder. It was a drawing of the park, the sun rising behind the trees. Two figures stood in the middle, one tall, one small, watching the light spread across the grass. "You like it?" he asked. I swallowed hard. "It's beautiful." He smiled faintly. "It's us." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Yeah, it is." When he went to bed, I found myself staring at that drawing long after the house went quiet. The colors were soft but hopeful. I pinned it to the fridge next to one of his old school photos. The next morning, we went to the courthouse one last time. Glenn's sentencing was scheduled for that day, and though I didn't want to see him again, part of me needed to. Closure, I guess. The courtroom was packed press family survivors. Glenn was brought in wearing a gray jumpsuit, his hands cuffed. He looked older, smaller somehow, though his eyes still carried that same unsettling calm. When the judge entered the room, fell silent. He read through the list of charges, slowly, methodically. When he reached the final verdict, life without the possibility of parole, a wave of quiet relief moved through the crowd. Glenn stood, cleared his throat, and spoke. "I only did what was necessary. Discipline creates purity. You'll see one day." The judge's gavel slammed down. "Enough." As the deputies led him out, Glenn turned his head slightly, his eyes finding mine. For a brief moment, I thought I saw fear flicker there. Not divine power, not arrogance, just fear. And then he was gone. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed again, their microphones like weapons. "Mr. Walker, do you feel justice has been served?" I paused, Liam's hand gripping mine. "Justice isn't about what happens to him," I said. "It's about what happens after, for all of us." That night, we celebrated quietly. Lopez stopped by with takeout and a bottle of sparkling cider. She sat at our table, smiling, as Liam poured drinks into 3 mismatched glasses. "To new beginnings," she said, raising hers. "To peace," I added. "To never going back," Liam said softly, clinking his glass against ours. We laughed, and for a while, it almost felt normal. Later, after Lopez left, Liam and I sat on the porch watching the stars. The night was still, the air warm and gentle. "Do you think people like him ever really believe what they say?" he asked suddenly. "I think they believe in control," I said. "They mistake fear for faith. But real faith doesn't make you afraid, it makes you free." He nodded, his gaze lost in the constellations above. "I used to pray he'd stop hurting me," he said quietly. "But maybe God answered differently. Maybe he sent you." My throat tightened. I should have come sooner. He leaned against my shoulder. "You came when it mattered." We stayed like that for a long time, just breathing, just existing in the calm. After the storm, the crickets sang. The wind carried the smell of pine and new grass. A week later, we started therapy together. Dr. Ramirez greeted us with that same calm smile and a cup of coffee waiting for me, like she already knew I'd need it. She spoke mostly to Liam that day, asking about his dreams, his drawings, his fears. When she asked him what he wanted most now, that it was all over, he didn't hesitate. "I want to feel normal again." She smiled gently. "Normal is different for everyone, but you're already getting there." When we left, I asked him, "Do you believe her?" He grinned. "Yeah. Do you?" I laughed quietly. "I'm starting to." That evening, as the sun set behind the trees, I sat by the window with my journal. I'd started writing again, something I hadn't done in years. The words came slow at first, then faster. It's strange how light creeps back in after darkness. It doesn't rush. It waits patient, steady. Maybe healing is like that, quiet but relentless. I closed the notebook and looked around the house. The same walls that once held fear now held warmth. The same rooms that had echoed with silence were filled with life again. Before bed, I checked on Liam. He was asleep, his arm draped over the dog we'd adopted from the shelter a few days earlier. The dog's tail twitched as they dreamed together. I stood there for a moment, then turned off the light. When I finally lay down, I whispered into the dark, "It's over, Helen. He's safe." For the first time in years, sleep came easily. No nightmares, no guilt, just peace. The next morning, sunlight poured into the house. Liam woke before me and made breakfast, burnt toast and eggs, too salty but perfect all the same. We sat together laughing as the dog begged under the table. When I looked at him, I saw something new in his eyes, something unbroken. He caught me staring. "What?" "Nothing," I said with a smile. "I'm just proud of you." He grinned. "You should be. I'm kind of awesome." We both laughed, and the sound filled the room like light spilling through an open door. Outside, the day was bright. For the first time, it felt like a beginning, not an aftermath. The scars were still there, but they no longer hurt. They were reminders, proof that we had survived the dark and stepped into something better. And as we walked out into the morning together, I realized that the light had finally come home to stay. The letter came on a gray Tuesday morning, tucked among bills and advertisements. The envelope was plain with no return address, but my name was written neatly across the front in careful handwriting. I stood in the kitchen holding it for a long moment before opening it. Inside were several sheets of paper and a short note that read, "You don't know me, but because of you, I'm still alive. Don't stop speaking the truth." There was a list attached, names of families from nearby towns, parents whose children had attended Glenn's discipline retreats. Some of the names were crossed out. At the bottom, someone had written, "More victims may still be out there." I stared at the pages, my coffee turning cold in my hand. It wasn't over. Glenn's network, the people who had funded him, protected him. They hadn't all been exposed. I folded the letter and slipped it into the drawer beside the sink, but my mind wouldn't let it go. When Liam came downstairs, hair messy and half awake, he noticed the tension on my face. "What's wrong?" "Just some old business," I said. "Nothing you need to worry about." He poured cereal and sat at the table, squinting at me. "Dad, you've got that look again. The same one you had before everything went crazy." I smiled faintly. "That obvious?" He grinned. "Yeah." I sat across from him, watching him eat, trying to decide what to do. He deserved peace, not another storm. But as much as I wanted to leave it all behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't finished yet. Later that day, I drove to the police station. Lopez met me in her office, papers piled high on her desk. "I thought you were done with this place," she said, smiling faintly. "So did I," I replied, handing her the letter. "Someone sent this." She skimmed through it, her expression darkening. "Whoever wrote this knew details we haven't released publicly. These names, some are still under investigation." "So it's legit," she nodded slowly. "Looks that way. It also means someone on the inside is scared enough to talk, but not safe enough to come forward. What happens now, I'll add it to the case file," she said. "But Ray, I need to be honest, you've done your part. You don't need to carry this any further." "Maybe not," I said. "But if there are more families suffering like we did, someone has to keep going." She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "You've got a stubborn streak, you know that I've heard rumors," I said with a grin. Lopez smiled. "All right, I'll keep you posted. But promise me something, don't do anything reckless. I'm not that guy anymore." Her eyebrow lifted. "Right." When I got home, Liam was sitting on the porch steps with a book in his lap. The dog was sprawled beside him, asleep in the sun. "Where'd you go?" he asked. "To see Detective Lopez." "About that letter," I paused, surprised. "You saw it. It was sticking out of the drawer. I wasn't snooping, I swear." I sat beside him. "It's okay." Yeah, it was about that. He looked out toward the trees. Are you going to get involved again? I hesitated. I'm not sure. Maybe. He was quiet for a while, then said softly, "Just promise me you'll be careful." I promise. That night after Liam went to bed, I found myself in his room again. Not to check on him, but just to look. The camera was long gone, but I still felt its ghost there. The guilt, the fear, the helplessness. Now it was just a boy's room again. Posters, books, a guitar propped in the corner. The space felt alive like him. Downstairs, I sat at the kitchen table and began writing. Not for the police, not for the media, just for myself. I wrote about fear, about faith, twisted into cruelty, about the power of paying attention. When I stopped, my hands ached, but my heart felt lighter. The next day, Lopez called again. "You might want to hear this," she said. "We traced one of the anonymous donations made to Glenn's church. It came from a man named Richard Combs, a local councilman. We think he used church money to hide political funds." I felt a surge of anger. So it really was bigger than just him. "It always is," she said. "We're preparing new warrants. You helped more than you know." After the call, I looked out the window. The world felt the same blue sky wind in the pines, but I knew things had changed beneath the surface. Salem had been shaken awake, and I wasn't sure it would ever go back to sleep. That weekend, Liam and I painted the living room. It had been Helen's favorite shade of blue. As we worked, he said, "Do you ever think about Mom all the time? What do you think she'd say if she saw us now?" I laughed softly. "Probably that we should have hired someone to paint." He grinned, paintbrush dripping. "Yeah, that sounds like her." We painted until our arms were sore, then collapsed on the couch, laughing at the streaks of blue on our faces. It wasn't just paint, it was renewal. A few days later, the town hosted a community gathering at the park, the same park that once stood in the church's shadow. There were speeches, food stands, music. Parents brought their children. And for the first time in months, people smiled without fear. Mrs. Dorsey found me near the oak tree. "They're planting something," she said, pointing to a group of kids with shovels. Liam stood among them, placing a small oak sapling into the ground. A sign beside it read, "For the lost, for the found, for the light that returned." I swallowed hard. He thought of that himself. She nodded. "He's his father's son." When Liam came running over dirt on his hands, he said, "It's for everyone, not just me. Even the ones who didn't make it out." I hugged him tightly, unable to speak. That night, I went to Helen's grave. The air smelled of rain, the grass still damp from the afternoon storm. I placed a small bouquet of wildflowers on the headstone and whispered, "He's safe. He's strong. You'd be proud of him." For the first time, I didn't feel like I was talking to someone lost. I felt like I was talking to someone who had never really left. When I got home, Liam was waiting on the porch, 2 mugs of hot chocolate beside him. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, sitting beside him. "Better than I've been in a long time." He handed me a mug. "Good, because I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "I want to help people, like Detective Lopez does. Or maybe write about stuff that matters. I don't know yet. But I want to do something that changes things." I smiled, feeling tears sting my eyes. "Then you already are." He leaned against me quiet for a while, then said, "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" "Yeah," I said softly. "We already are." Inside the house, the walls smelled faintly of fresh paint. The dog barked from the hallway, wagging his tail like the world was brand new. I looked at Liam, at the boy who had survived so much darkness and still found light, and I realized something simple but true. Our story wasn't about revenge or justice anymore. It was about rebuilding. And as we sat there, the night calm and clear, I whispered to myself, "The bridge is whole again. A year can change everything. The wind carried the scent of maple leaves that morning, rustling through the trees outside our little house on the edge of Salem. The world felt different now, lighter somehow. The kind of peace I used to pray for, but never thought I'd see again, had finally found us. I stood at the window with a cup of coffee, watching Liam in the yard, tossing a ball to our dog Copper. His laughter cut through the cool autumn air like music. He had grown taller this year, stronger too. His shoulders no longer curled inward like he was trying to disappear. He walked with confidence, now his voice steady when he spoke. The boy who once lived in silence had rediscovered his sound. Every morning he watered the oak sapling we'd planted at the park, the one that had become a symbol for the whole town. It had grown fast, its branches spreading wide, its leaves turning a deep, burnished gold. Sometimes I caught him sitting beneath it after school reading or sketching. Once, when I asked what he was drawing, he smiled and said, "Just life." The town had changed too. The church had been converted into a community center. People came not to kneel, but to talk, to share, to heal. The same people who once avoided eye contact now waved across the street. Lopez said it best one day when she stopped by. "You didn't just expose a monster, Ray. You gave people permission to see." Liam's school was holding a fall assembly that week. He told me he'd be speaking, but refused to let me read his notes ahead of time. "You'll just cry," he teased. He wasn't wrong. That Friday, I sat in the back of the gymnasium, surrounded by parents and students. The air smelled like paper pencil shavings and a hint of nervous excitement. When Liam's name was called, he walked to the microphone, his hands trembling just a little. "My project is called Someone Who Changed My Life," he began. Most people picked celebrities or historical heroes. I picked my dad. My breath caught in my throat. "He doesn't wear a cape," Liam continued, "and he doesn't have powers. But he saved me anyway. He taught me that real strength isn't about fighting, it's about protecting. He showed me that love doesn't hurt and that it's okay to ask for help when you're scared. I used to think broken things couldn't be fixed. But my dad proved me wrong." There was a long silence before the applause began, gentle at first, then growing until the whole gym filled with the sound. I couldn't stop the tears, but I didn't care. When Liam walked off the stage, he looked at me, smiling through the lights, and for the first time I felt the weight of every dark night lift from my chest. That night, we sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees. The air was cool, filled with the smell of pine and smoke from distant chimneys. Copper slept at our feet. Liam leaned his head against my shoulder. "Do you ever wish none of it happened?" he asked softly. I thought for a moment. Every single day, I admitted. But if it hadn't, we might never have understood what love really means. He was quiet for a while, then said, "I want to help people one day, like you did. Maybe tell stories that make them feel less alone." I smiled. "Then you already know where to start." The following week, I launched my podcast, The Long Road Home. It wasn't fancy, just my voice, a microphone, and stories that deserved to be heard. The first episode was titled The Light We Keep. I talked about fear, faith, forgiveness, and how healing isn't about forgetting, but remembering differently. Lopez even joined me for one episode, her voice steady as she said, "Sometimes courage is just a parent who refuses to look away." The show started to grow faster than I expected. Messages poured in from other families, parents, sons, daughters, sharing their pain and gratitude. One woman wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to leave. My kids are safe now." I printed that message and pinned it above my desk. It reminded me why telling the truth mattered. One evening in late November, Liam and I visited the park again. The oak tree had lost most of its leaves, but its branches were strong and full of promise. The plaque at its base caught the light of the setting sun. "For the lost, for the found, for the light that returned." We sat beneath it, watching the golden sky fade into twilight. "Do you think it ever really ends?" he asked. "No," I said. "But that's okay. Some things aren't meant to end. They just change." He nodded thoughtfully. "Then maybe that's what the light is. It doesn't erase the dark. It just keeps shining through it," I smiled. "You're starting to sound like your mom." He grinned. "Good. She was smart." When we walked home, the air was crisp and the stars had begun to appear. I looked over at him, the boy who had once hidden from the night, now walking calmly beneath it. I realized that peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the courage to live despite it. Later that night, after Liam fell asleep, I recorded one last message for my podcast. My voice was steady, softer than usual. I've learned that healing isn't about erasing what happened. It's about finding meaning in the mess, light in the dark, and love in the ruins. If you're listening tonight and you're hurting, please know that your story isn't over. There's still light left for you too. Sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to give up. Be that person for yourself or for someone else. I paused, letting the silence breathe, then smiled into the microphone. If our story touched your heart, take a moment to share it. Maybe it will reach someone who needs to know they're not alone. Leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. It always warms this father's heart to know who's out there. Don't forget to subscribe to the Long Road Home channel for more real stories about family faith and second chances. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. The night felt calm and endless, filled with the sound of something new, hope. The next morning, I found Liam sitting by the window, sketching again. The drawing showed a small house under a wide sky, a single tree standing tall beside it. At the bottom, he'd written 3 words in careful pencil strokes. "We made it." I looked at him, at the peace in his eyes, and felt the warmth rise in my chest. "Yeah," I whispered. "We really did." And as the sun rose over Salem, the house filled with golden light spilling through every open door. The long road home had finally ended, not in silence, but in laughter. And the light we kept would keep shining for us, and for anyone who needed to find their way through the dark.